"Cat got your tongue?" Senator John Kennedy asked mildly, his Louisiana draw softening the sharp edge of the question. "That's okay. Sometimes the numbers speak louder than words. And these numbers," he gestured to the thick folder before him, "they're screaming." The hearing that was supposed to cement Nancy Pelosi's legacy as an elder stateswoman defending free markets had, in just under an hour, transformed into her political funeral. It should have been her moment of triumph. Instead, it became her Gethsemane. All because she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the gentleman from Louisiana. The Senate Banking Committee hearing room buzzed with anticipation. C-SPAN cameras adjusted their angles, ready to capture what promised to be a defining clash over the Honest Act, proposed legislation with the simple, yet revolutionary, goal of banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks. The morning sun streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the rich wood paneling of a chamber where financial titans and political powerhouses had crossed swords for generations. Today felt different, though. Today felt personal. Nancy Pelosi entered the room not just as a witness, but as returning royalty. At 84, the former speaker moved with the ingrained confidence of someone who had wielded immense power for so long that deference felt less like courtesy and more like her birthright. Her perfectly tailored Hermes suit caught the light, a subtle armor of wealth and status. She made her way to the witness table, pausing to offer practiced, regal nods to supporters in the gallery. Behind her, a phalanx of aides, young, sharp, carrying briefcases and tablets, stood ready. A mobile command center prepared to supply talking points for any conceivable contingency. This was Pelosi in her element, the center of attention, the master legislator, ready to educate the less enlightened. Across the room, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat with his committee colleagues. His posture relaxed, almost casual. The 73-year-old adjusted his simple reading glasses and shuffled a few papers with the unhurried manner of a small-town lawyer preparing for a routine deposition. His gray hair was slightly mussed. His suit respectable but not ostentatious, the carefully cultivated image of a regular guy. Albeit one who happened to hold degrees from Vanderbilt, Virginia Law, and Oxford University, England. He was the embodiment of the "ah shucks" highly educated Southern gentleman, a persona that often lulled opponents into a false sense of security. Pelosi was about to learn, far too late, that the Oxford intellect was far more dominant than the Louisiana drawl. "The gentle lady from California is recognized," the committee chairman announced, setting in motion what would become one of the most devastating, meticulously planned political takedowns in modern congressional history. Pelosi cleared her throat and launched into her prepared remarks, her voice resonant with decades of command. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appear before you today to address what I can only describe as an un-American assault on the free market principles that have made our nation great." She held up the bill. The so-called Honest Act is nothing more than performative politics, designed to score cheap points with voters who don't understand how capitalism works. The condescension was immediate, palpable. This wasn't a debate, it was a lecture. Several Democratic senators shifted uncomfortably. Banning congressional stock trading had significant popular support, even among their base. But Pelosi, embodying the old guard, pressed on, her voice gaining strength, shifting into a defense of her own legacy. "For decades, I have served this nation with distinction. I have broken glass ceilings, led historic legislative victories, and always, conducted myself with the highest ethical standards." Then came the pivot, the attack. "Yet now we have senators, like Mr. Kennedy here." She gestured dismissively in his direction, barely glancing at him, who would rather engage in baseless class warfare than address the real issues facing American families. Kennedy's expression remained placid, almost serene. He continued making careful notes on his legal pad in his deliberate, neat script. Those who knew him well, however, might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his focus. He was listening, intently. "Let me be clear," Pelosi continued, her voice rising, feeding off her own perceived righteousness. "Senator Kennedy represents everything wrong with the new Republican Party. A Trump sycophant who plays a folksy character on TV while carrying water for the extreme MAGA agenda." She ticked off her grievances. "He pretends to be a populist. But where was he when we were fighting for working families? Where was he when we passed the Affordable Care Act? Where was he when we saved the economy from Republican destruction? The gallery erupted in applause from Pelosi's supporters. She basked in it, raising her chin slightly, the picture of aggrieved nobility. "This bill," she said, waving the copy of the Honest Act as if swatting away a fly, "is nothing but political theater from a senator who would rather pose as a country lawyer than do the hard work of governance." Mr. Kennedy talks with his affected drawl, quotes his little sayings, pretends to be a simple man from Louisiana. But we know what he really is. Another millionaire protecting his wealthy friends while pretending to care about the common people. She turned, finally, to face Kennedy directly, her eyes blazing. "You, sir, are a fraud, a backwater populist who somehow stumbled into the United States Senate and now wants to destroy the free market system that allows Americans to build wealth and prosperity." She leaned forward, accusing. "You claim to care about corruption? Where were you when your president was violating the emoluments clause every single day? Where were you when he was enriching himself at taxpayer expense?" The attack was deeply personal, vicious, and designed to provoke an emotional, defensive reaction from Kennedy. It was a classic Pelosi power play: go for the jugular. Define your opponent, and dominate the narrative through sheer force of will. Kennedy slowly looked up from his notes. He met Pelosi's glare, his eyes calm, steady, and then, the faintest hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't mockery. It was something closer to sympathy. Like a seasoned chess master watching an opponent make a critical, predictable error. Pelosi, emboldened by his silence, mistaking his calm for weakness, pressed her attack, walking deeper into the trap. "The truth is, Senator Kennedy opposes this bill because he knows it would expose his own financial dealings. How much are you worth, Senator? How did a simple country lawyer acquire such wealth? At least I've been transparent about my success. At least I don't hide behind some ridiculous Andy Griffith routine while enriching myself." She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "You want to talk about stock trading? Let's talk about competence. Let's talk about understanding markets. Let's talk about making smart investments based on public information and decades of experience. But I suppose someone who pretends to be a hick from the bayou wouldn't understand sophisticated financial planning." The personal nature of the attack, the sheer venom, caused several senators to exchange uncomfortable glances. Even some Democrats winced, but Pelosi was just getting started, caught up in her own performance. "This man," she declared, pointing directly at Kennedy, "wants you to believe he's fighting corruption. But he's the most corrupt of all. Corrupting our discourse with his fake persona. Corrupting the Senate with his partisan games. Corrupting democracy itself by supporting a president who tried to overthrow our government. And now he wants to lecture me about ethics? This costume-wearing clown wants to question my integrity?" The hearing room fell utterly silent. Even Pelosi's supporters seemed stunned by the ferocity, the raw, unrestrained anger of her attack. All eyes turned to Kennedy, waiting. How would he respond to this brutal, personal assault? Kennedy carefully set down his pen. He removed his reading glasses. He took out a handkerchief and began cleaning them. Slowly, methodically. Each gesture seemed deliberate, designed to lower the temperature. To contrast with Pelosi's uncontrolled fury. He put the glasses back on. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the soft, unhurried cadence of northern Louisiana. Each word measured, wrapped in an almost gentle politeness. "Well," he said, drawing out the single syllable. "Bless your heart, Ms. Pelosi. That was quite a speech. Quite a speech indeed." He paused, letting the silence build, letting her own words hang in the air. "You know where I come from. When someone gets that worked up about something, it usually means they've got something to hide." He shuffled his papers slowly, deliberately. "Now, you called me a lot of names there. Fraud, clown, costume wearing." He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of malice. "My mama always taught me that when folks start name callin', it's 'cause they've run out of facts. But that's okay." He looked up, that mild smile still playing on his lips. "I've got plenty of facts. Would you like to hear some?" He reached for the first, thick manila folder, the one marked clearly, Pelosi, Trading Records. He opened it. "Now, you mentioned transparency and sophisticated financial planning. That's good. That's real good. Because I've got some questions about your financial planning that I think the American people deserve answers to. He looked directly at her. You talked about my wealth. And you're right. I've done okay for a boy from Zachary. But shall we talk about your portfolio? Ma'am, shall we talk about how a public servant, on a government salary, somehow became worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars? Pelosi's face, which had been flushed with anger, suddenly went pale. Kennedy's folder was thick, very thick, and he wasn't smiling anymore. You see, Kennedy continued, his voice still gentle, almost conversational, the calm before the storm. I may talk slow, but I read fast, and I've been reading some fascinating things about your stock trades. Fascinating things indeed. He looked up again. So, if you're done calling me names, maybe we could have an adult conversation about why your investment returns consistently beat every hedge fund on Wall Street. Because that's either mighty impressive, or mighty suspicious. And I think the American people have a right to know which one it is. He opened the folder wider, revealing page after page of financial documents, charts, highlighted transactions. The cameras zoomed in, catching Pelosi's expression, a mask of dawning horror, as she realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory lap she'd anticipated. This wasn't a debate she could win with rhetoric. This was an evidence-based prosecution. And she was the defendant. So, Kennedy said, looking up at her with that same mild, almost sympathetic smile, shall we begin? Perhaps with the Visa IPO of 2008? Because that's a story I think everyone here would find illuminating. The hunter had just become the hunted. The Queen's gambit had been declined. And a devastating counterattack was underway. Everyone in the room could feel it. The carefully constructed facade of Nancy Pelosi, political titan and ethical paragon, was about to be systematically dismantled. Document by damning document. Nancy Pelosi sat frozen at the witness table. Her planned coronation, her defense of the status quo that had served her so well, was rapidly transforming into something far different, far more dangerous. The Oxford-educated gentleman from Louisiana, the one she had just dismissed as a costume-wearing clown, was about to give her, and the watching nation, a brutal lesson in why it's profoundly dangerous to underestimate someone just because they talk slow and smile a lot. The first crack in Pelosi's carefully constructed armor of untouchability came not from a complex derivative or an obscure hedge fund strategy, but from a simple initial public offering, IPO, back in 2008, an IPO that made her family millions while millions of ordinary Americans were losing their homes. Kennedy adjusted his reading glasses and pulled out the first series of documents from his folder, laying them carefully on the desk like a seasoned poker player revealing a winning hand. One damning card at a time. The hearing room remained utterly silent. The only sounds the soft whisper of paper and the almost imperceptible hum of the C-SPAN cameras adjusting their focus. Now, Ms. Pelosi, Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl making each word sound deceptively like casual conversation between neighbors over sweet tea. Let's travel back to 2008. Remember 2008? His gaze swept the room. That was a tough year for most Americans. Banks failing, homes foreclosing, retirement accounts evaporating. The foundations of our economy seemed to be crumbling. He paused, letting the memory of that national trauma settle. But, he added, his voice still soft, it was a pretty good year for you. Wasn't it, ma'am? He held up the first document, angling it towards the cameras. March 2008, while millions of Americans were watching their life savings disappear, you and your husband received a rather special allocation of Visa IPO shares. He emphasized the word special. Now, most folks, regular folks, they don't get access to hot IPOs before they hit the market. Those shares are usually reserved for big institutions, well-connected insiders. But y'all, he used the familiar plural, subtly linking Nancy and Paul Pelosi as one financial entity. Y'all got 5.000 shares at the initial price of $44 each. That's a $220 investment. Pelosi straightened in her chair, attempting to regain control. My husband is a successful private investor. His decisions are his own. It was the standard deflection, the shield she had used for years. I'm sure he is. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, cutting off the escape route before she could fully retreat behind it. Mighty successful. But here's what's interesting. He leaned forward slightly, drawing the committee in, at the exact same time, and I mean the exact same time, that this lucrative, exclusive IPO access was granted. Right here in Congress. We were considering something called the Credit Card Fair Fee Act. You remember that bill, don't you, ma'am? As Speaker of the House. You certainly would have. He pulled out another document. This bill would have allowed merchants, small businesses mostly, to negotiate those swipe fees with the big credit card companies. It would have saved consumers and small businesses billions. But, he added pointedly, it would have cost Visa and MasterCard billions in profits. He displayed the next document. This is the legislative calendar from March 2008. The bill was scheduled for markup in committee. It had strong bipartisan support. Consumer groups loved it. Small businesses were practically begging for it. It looked like it was going to sail through. He paused, looking up at Pelosi over the rim of his glasses. His expression one of mild curiosity. And then, it just disappeared. Poof. He made a small vanishing gesture with his hand. Like magic. Never made it out of committee. Never got a vote. The gallery was leaning forward now. Several reporters were typing furiously. The pieces clicking into place. And here's the other magic trick. Kennedy continued, his voice still even. 2 days. 2 days after y'all bought that Visa stock at $44. It jumped to $64 a share on the open market. He let the numbers sink in. That's a 45% gain. In 48 hours. Your $220 investment turned into $320. Just like that. He snapped his fingers softly. The sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. A $100 profit. Most folks work their whole lives. Save diligently. Play by the rules. And they never see a return like that. Let alone in 2 days. This is purely circumstantial. Pelosi began. Her voice strained. You're implying. Oh. I'm just getting started, ma'am. Kennedy held up a hand, stopping her again. See, I've got the emails here. He pulled out another set of papers. Clearly marked internal communications. Internal Visa corporate communications. Thanking certain members of Congress for their support and understanding during the legislative process surrounding the Fair Fee Act. He looked directly at Pelosi. Your name, Ms. Pelosi, features rather prominently in those thank you notes. A low murmur ran through the gallery. Even the Democratic senators were looking deeply uncomfortable now. This wasn't just about a lucky trade. This was suggesting direct corporate influence. Facilitated by the Speaker's office. But here's the real kicker. Kennedy said, clearly warming to his theme. The country lawyer building his case brick by damning brick. That credit card Fair Fee Act? The one that would have hurt Visa's bottom line? It never made it to the House floor for a vote. The person who decides what bills come to the floor. The Speaker of the House. That was you. Ma'am, you controlled the agenda. You decided that bill, despite its bipartisan support, would simply die. He let the accusation hang. Stark and unavoidable. So, let's recap the timeline. A bill threatening Visa's profits is moving through Congress. You, the Speaker, get access to a highly lucrative, restricted Visa IPO. You invest heavily. Suddenly, the bill threatening Visa mysteriously vanishes. Then, the Visa stock explodes, netting your family a quick $100 profit. He looked around the room. Now, where I come from, we have a word for that kind of sequence of events. But I'm too polite to use it in mixed company. Pelosi's face had gone from pale back to flushed. Anger warring with panic. This is McCarthyism. You're taking innocent investments and twisting them into some nefarious conspiracy. Innocent? Kennedy's eyebrows rose slightly. Ma'am, do you know what the statistical odds are of getting a restricted allocation in a hot IPO right before? As Speaker, killing legislation that would directly harm that very company's profits? I had my staff, some smart young folks, calculate it. He paused for dramatic effect. It's about the same as getting struck by lightning, while winning the Powerball lottery, on your birthday, while simultaneously being eaten by a shark. He pulled out a chart. Simple but devastating. But maybe you just got lucky. Maybe your husband is just the luckiest investor in human history. So, let's look at the pattern, shall we? The chart went up on the screens around the room. It showed Pelosi's portfolio performance from 2008 to 2010, the height of the financial crisis. Between 2008 and 2010, Kennedy narrated, "The worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Your family's portfolio gained an astonishing 62%. The S&P 500, the benchmark for the entire market, lost 20% in that same period." The lines on the chart told the story. A bold green line representing the Pelosi portfolio soaring upwards, while a dismal blue line representing the S&P 500 plummeted downwards. "You didn't just beat the market, ma'am," Kennedy stated, his voice still deceptively mild. "You destroyed it, during a time when average Americans were losing everything." He closed the Visa folder and reached for another, even thicker one. "But that," he said, opening the new folder, "was just 2008. Should we talk about 2021? Because your husband's trades around the big tech antitrust hearings, well, those are even more interesting." Pelosi gripped the edge of the witness table, her knuckles white. Behind her, one of her aides was whispering urgently to another, likely scrambling to formulate a damage control strategy. But it was too late. The narrative was set. The pattern was emerging. The Oxford gentleman from Louisiana had just drawn first blood, and everyone knew the wounds were deep. Having landed a devastating blow with the Visa IPO example, Kennedy now skillfully zoomed out, transforming that single, suspicious trade into the cornerstone of a much larger, more damning edifice. He wasn't just alleging one instance of questionable timing, he was building a case for a pattern of statistically impossible financial outperformance, stretching over years, defying market logic, and strongly suggesting a systemic abuse of privileged information. "How does that happen?" Kennedy asked, his voice still carrying that mild, conversational tone, letting the brutal numbers from the 2008 to 2010 chart hang in the air. Pelosi's portfolio soaring 62% while the market cratered 20%. How does a public servant, someone whose primary job is legislating and oversight, consistently make investment returns that the most dedicated, highly paid professional money managers on Wall Street would kill for? Warren Buffett himself, he invoked the universally acknowledged benchmark of investment genius, doesn't have consistent returns like yours, ma'am, not even close. He pulled out another photograph, laying it beside the financial charts. "This is from the 2008 Democratic Caucus retreat," he narrated. "There you are, Speaker Pelosi, sitting right next to the CEO of Visa. According to the official schedule." He tapped the photo. "That convivial chat took place just 3 days before your husband executed that perfectly timed purchase of Visa IPO shares. Just a coincidence, I'm sure." The implication was clear. Access, proximity to power players, combined with legislative control, created opportunities unavailable to ordinary citizens. "I do not discuss my husband's investments," Pelosi protested again, falling back on her increasingly fragile shield. "No," Kennedy acknowledged softly, "but let me ask you this. Ma'am, do you and your husband file joint tax returns?" Pelosi hesitated, trapped. "Yes, but..." "So his gains are your gains," Kennedy interjected, closing the legal loophole. "His wealth is your wealth. Under California community property law, the law of your home state, those stocks, those profits, are half yours. You cannot hide behind the 'it's my husband' defense when you are literally, legally, and financially profiting directly from every single one of these trades." He pulled out another thick document. "But let's give you the benefit of the doubt again. Maybe your husband isn't just lucky, maybe he's the single greatest stock picker in the history of the world. Maybe he's got a genuine gift, a sixth sense for the market." The sarcasm was gentle, almost imperceptible, but it stung. "So, I had my staff, those diligent young folks, pull the trading records of your colleagues, both sides of the aisle. Let's see how the average member of Congress does. Shall we?" He held up a thick printout, filled with names and numbers. "You know what we found? The average member of Congress," he scanned the summary page, "beats the market by about 2 to 3% annually. That's pretty good, better than average, probably because, let's be honest, we all have access to economic briefings, industry discussions, maybe a better sense of the legislative winds." He then looked directly at Pelosi, his voice dropping slightly. "But you, ma'am, year after year, decade after decade, you beat the market not by 2 or 3%, but by 30, sometimes 40%. Consistently. He set the document down. That's not just good. Ma'am, according to every financial expert we consulted, that's statistically impossible. He let the word hang in the air, heavy and irrefutable, unless. He paused, allowing the inevitable conclusion to form in everyone's mind. Unless you're trading on information the public doesn't have. Information about what bills will actually pass. And which will die. Information about what regulations will be enacted. Information about which companies will receive massive government contracts. He leaned forward slightly. The kind of detailed, non-public, market-moving information that flows through the speaker's office every single day. The kind of information that would land anyone else, a corporate executive, a hedge fund manager, a regular citizen, in federal prison if they traded on it. The hearing room was dead silent now. Even Pelosi's most ardent supporters in the gallery had stopped trying to rationalize. The weight of the cumulative evidence, the sheer scale and consistency of the outperformance, was becoming undeniable. This wasn't just luck, it wasn't just skill. It pointed towards something far more systemic, far more corrupt. Kennedy had successfully established the pattern. Now, he would fill in the details with even more damning examples. Having established the long-term, statistically impossible pattern, Kennedy opened his next folder with the deliberate care of a surgeon preparing for a delicate, yet necessary, operation. The hearing room remained transfixed as he pulled out a series of charts and documents, shifting the focus from the financial crisis era to the more recent, and arguably even more blatant, windfalls derived from big tech stocks. Now, Ms. Pelosi, he began, his tone remaining conversational despite the explosive content he was about to reveal. Let's fast forward to more recent times. The landscape has changed, but the pattern, it seems, remains remarkably consistent. Let's talk about June 18, 2021. He pulled up a brokerage statement on the screens. On that day, your husband exercised call options to purchase 4.000 shares of Alphabet. That's Google's parent company, at a strike price of $1.200 per share. Now, at the time, the stock was already trading around $2.500. He paused, doing the simple math for dramatic effect. That's an instant paper profit of, he pretended to calculate, though the number was clearly prepared, about $5.3 million. On a single trade, exercised on a single day. Gasps rippled through the gallery. $5 million. In one trade. More money than most Americans would see accumulated over an entire lifetime of work. Now, here's what's curious. Kennedy continued, pulling up a legislative calendar alongside the trade confirmation. Just 1 week later, Ms. Pelosi, not a month, not a year, 1 week, the House Judiciary Committee held a critical vote on a package of antitrust bills specifically targeting big tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Apple. Bills that had real teeth. Bills that could have potentially broken up these companies or severely curtailed their market power. Bills that you, as Speaker of the House, had the ultimate power to advance, or to kill. He looked up at Pelosi. That mild, inquisitive expression back on his face. And what happened to those bills? Ma'am? The ones that threatened the very companies your family had just made a massive bet on? He didn't wait for her answer. They went nowhere. They died in committee, never saw the light of day on the House floor. He pointed to a stock chart that appeared on screen. And wouldn't you know it? The tech companies' stock prices, which had been dropping on fears of that very regulation, suddenly, miraculously, recovered. Funny how that works. Pelosi's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in her ear. She waved him away impatiently. Those bills didn't have the votes. She stated flatly. Didn't they? Kennedy countered instantly, pulling out another document, because I've got internal whip counts right here, showing there was majority support, including bipartisan backing for several key provisions. I have internal memos from your own Democratic leadership team discussing strategies for passage, acknowledging the bills could pass if brought to the floor. He looked directly at her. But they never got that chance. Did they? They never got a floor vote. And your family had just made $5.3 million betting they wouldn't. He pulled up a new, complex slide on the screens around the room. It showed a detailed timeline. Paul Pelosi's tech stock purchases and option exercises on the top line. and corresponding legislative actions, or inactions, directly below. The correlation was visually stunning, almost laughably blatant. But maybe Google was just another lucky guess. Kennedy conceded with mock generosity. So let's look at the broader pattern just within that period. He pointed to the timeline. May 2021. Your husband buys call options on Apple and Amazon. June 2021. The big tech antitrust bills die in committee under your leadership. December 2021. He buys more tech stocks. Loading up. January 2022. You publicly announce that regulating big tech is not a priority for the upcoming session. He let the sequence sink in. Every single time, the lucrative trades come right before the legislative action, or inaction, that benefits those specific stocks. It's remarkably prescient. At this point, a young woman in the gallery, clearly a finance student or amateur trader, held up her phone, displaying a brightly colored app interface. Kennedy noticed and smiled, acknowledging the cultural phenomenon her trading had become. "Ah, I see someone out there has the Pelosi Portfolio Tracker app," he said, drawing laughter from the room. For those who don't know, that's a real app. Several, in fact, apps that let regular folks automatically copy Ms. Pelosi's husband's trades in real time. They have, he checked his notes, feigning surprise, collectively, over 100,000 users. The tagline for one is literally, "Trade like the speaker." The screens now showed screenshots of these apps, complete with push notifications. Nancy just bought Nvidia. Buy now. Pelosi sold Tesla. Consider selling. The creator of one of these apps, Kennedy continued, citing his team's research, testified to my staff. He said, and I quote, "Following Pelosi's trades is more reliable than any market analysis I've ever done. She hasn't had a major losing trade in over 15 years. It's statistically impossible without possessing material non-public information." He turned to face Pelosi directly, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its impact. "Ma'am, when professional Wall Street traders are building algorithms to copy your family's stock picks, when there are viral TikTok videos teaching teenagers how to invest like Nancy, when your portfolio's performance is demonstrably more reliable than Warren Buffett's, don't you think? Just maybe, that raises some serious questions about the source of that success?" The sophisticated financial planning Pelosi had boasted about earlier now seemed like a transparently flimsy cover story. The evidence suggested something far more systematic, far more insidious, was at play. "This is a free market," Pelosi began, attempting to pivot back to her prepared talking points. But the defense sounded weak, almost irrelevant against the mountain of specific, dated, and suspiciously timed trades Kennedy was presenting. Kennedy, sensing her retreat, pressed his advantage, moving to perhaps the most egregious and widely discussed example of the Pelosi portfolio's seemingly magical prescience. "Let's talk about Nvidia," he said, pulling out yet another folder. "This one thicker than the previous ones. Your husband's biggest score yet. A trade that became legendary. Not just on Wall Street, but on Main Street, thanks to those Pelosi tracker apps." He projected the trade details onto the screen. November 2023. Your husband buys millions of dollars worth of Nvidia call options when the stock is trading around $120 a share. A significant bet on a specific company in a volatile sector. He then displayed the Nvidia stock chart. Now, Nvidia is trading over $400 a share. That's more than a 200% return in just a matter of months. A spectacular gain. He paused, letting the sheer scale of the profit sink in. But here's the interesting part. The part that makes it more than just a lucky bet. He brought up a timeline correlating the purchase with government actions. He bought those options right before a series of major government AI initiatives were announced, initiatives funded by legislation moving through Congress. Initiatives discussed in classified briefings accessible only to senior leadership like, say, the Speaker of the House. Initiatives that would directly benefit Nvidia as a key supplier of AI chips. The timeline on the screen updated, showing the Nvidia option purchases perfectly aligned with closed-door briefings on AI policy and subsequent announcements of government contracts and semiconductor subsidies. "But my personal favorite," Kennedy said, clearly warming to his theme. adopting the tone of a storyteller sharing a particularly juicy piece of gossip. Is the Palo Alto Networks trade? February 2024. Your husband buys options in this cybersecurity company. A significant investment. He clicked, and the timeline shifted again. March 2024. Just weeks later, the government announces a major new cybersecurity initiative, pouring billions into strengthening defenses against foreign hacking. He pointed to the stock chart, and Palo Alto Networks stock jumps 30% almost overnight. Another massive win for the Pelosi portfolio. He looked up, feigning innocence. And who, pray tell, was briefed on the details of that multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity initiative in advance? Before the public announcement, he scanned the committee members. Oh, that's right, members of congressional leadership. That would be you, ma'am. At this point, Senator Elizabeth Warren, sitting further down the dais, was visibly uncomfortable. She leaned over to whisper something to Senator Sherrod Brown, the committee chairman, her expression deeply troubled. Kennedy, ever observant, noticed her discomfort and skillfully drew her into the proceedings, aiming to fracture the Democratic facade. Senator Warren, he said, his voice respectful, acknowledging her long-standing position on this issue. You've been a tireless champion of ending congressional stock trading. You've spoken eloquently about the potential for corruption. Based on the pattern we're seeing here, would you perhaps like to comment? Warren looked trapped. She was Pelosi's colleague, a fellow Democrat, but the evidence Kennedy was presenting flew directly in the face of everything Warren claimed to stand for. After a tense moment, she spoke, choosing her words carefully but pointedly. I believe all members of Congress, and their spouses, should be banned from trading individual stocks. No exceptions. The pointed nature of her response, no exceptions, wasn't lost on anyone. It was a clear, public rebuke of Pelosi's position and, implicitly, her conduct. Even Democrats were beginning to distance themselves, unwilling to defend the indefensible. Thank you, Senator Warren, Kennedy said, accepting the assist graciously. Now, Ms. Pelosi, let's address your primary defense again. You keep saying you don't know about your husband's trades. That it's all him. He held up a stack of official-looking documents. But I have here your annual financial disclosure forms. The ones you are legally required to file and sign, under penalty of perjury. He looked at her directly. Are you telling this committee, under oath, that you signed these complex financial documents, detailing millions upon millions of dollars in transactions, without actually reading them? Without having any idea what's in them? I trust my husband, Pelosi repeated, the defense sounding weaker each time. That's sweet, Kennedy interrupted, the folksy charm dripping with acid. Real sweet. But trust doesn't explain how your husband consistently buys stocks days before favorable government actions are announced. Trust doesn't explain returns that beat not just the market, but every professional hedge fund in America. Trust doesn't explain why thousands of amateur traders are successfully copying your portfolio as if you have a crystal ball. The litany of inconsistencies was overwhelming. The trust defense simply couldn't withstand the weight of the evidence. Kennedy pulled up one final, devastating chart. It tracked Nancy Pelosi's estimated net worth over her decades in Congress. Let's look at the big picture, shall we? He suggested. This chart shows your estimated net worth over time, based on those financial disclosure forms you sign but apparently don't read. The line on the chart told a story more compelling than any rhetoric. In 2008, Kennedy narrated, around the time of that very fortunate Visa IPO, your estimated net worth was about $30 million. Respectable, certainly. But today, according to the latest analysis, the line shot dramatically upward. Your family's net worth is estimated to be over $250 million. He let the number hang in the air. $250 million. That's an increase. He did the math slowly, emphasizing the scale, of $220 million, accumulated while serving in Congress. Your congressional salary, even at the speaker level, is around $223 a year. Even if we generously assume you saved every single penny of that salary for your entire 35-plus years in Congress, which, of course, you didn't, that would amount to less than $8 million. The math was stark, unavoidable. $8 million in salary. Kennedy repeated, $220 million in wealth growth. Where? He asked, his voice deceptively soft. Did the other $212 million come from? Ma'am? He looked around the room, making eye contact with his colleagues, with the reporters, with the gallery. So, either you are, without question, the single greatest investor in the history of American finance, greater than Buffett, greater than Soros, greater than anyone, or. He paused, letting the alternative sink in. Something else is going on. He turned back to Pelosi. And ma'am, with all due respect, if you truly are the greatest investor in history, why were you wasting your time in Congress all those years? You could have been running Goldman Sachs. Nervous laughter rippled through even the Democratic side of the room. The absurdity was undeniable. But here's what really bothers me, Kennedy continued, his voice taking on a more serious, almost somber tone. It's not just the sheer amount of money. Staggering as it is, it's the message it sends. The profound unfairness it represents. He gestured towards the gallery. Towards the cameras. We've got young people in this country buried under student loan debt, unable to afford homes, delaying starting families. We've got working folks struggling to pay for groceries and gas, watching their savings get eaten away by inflation. They're told constantly, work hard, play by the rules, be patient. Then, his voice hardened, they see you, a member of Congress, making millions upon millions of dollars on stock trades timed perfectly, magically, with legislation that you control, trades that look suspiciously like you're playing with a stacked deck. He gestured again to the gallery, where several young people were nodding emphatically. One held up a homemade sign. Why is her 401k worth $250 million and mine is $30,000? There is an entire generation out there. Ma'am, Kennedy said, his voice filled with genuine concern, that is losing faith in our system. They look at Washington, and they see a rigged game. They see the powerful enriching themselves while everyone else struggles to get by. And when they look at your trading record, when they see these impossible returns, what are they supposed to think? Ms. Pelosi? What conclusion can they possibly draw, other than the system is rigged against them? The camera caught several young people in the gallery nodding, some with tears in their eyes. This wasn't just about stocks anymore, it was about the fundamental promise of fairness in America. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said, turning to address the committee formally. At this time, I would like to enter into the official record analyses conducted by 3 separate, independent teams of financial forensics experts from MIT, the Wharton School of Business, and the University of Chicago. He handed thick-bound reports to the committee clerk. They all approached the data differently. He explained, different methodologies, different models, but they all reached the exact same, stunning conclusion. He picked up one of the reports. I quote from the MIT summary. The probability of achieving the reported returns documented in Speaker Emerita Pelosi's financial disclosures through random chance, market timing, or superior security analysis alone is approximately 0.000016%. He looked up. That's roughly a 1 in 6 million chance, statistically indistinguishable from zero. Murmurs filled the gallery. 1 in 6 million. But let's make it simpler. Kennedy continued, pulling up a final, devastating chart from the University of Chicago study. They analyzed 10,000 completely random portfolios, constructed using only the stocks available to you over your trading period. They ran millions of computer simulations. Not a single one, not one simulation out of millions, came close to matching your returns. He looked around the room, letting the impossibility sink in. Folks, that's like flipping a coin and getting heads 1,000 times in a row. It just doesn't happen in the real world. Unless, he paused for effect, the coin is rigged. A young analyst in the gallery held up his laptop, showing real-time calculations. Kennedy noticed and smiled. Ah, I see someone's running the numbers themselves. What are you finding, young man? The analyst, emboldened, called out. Based on standard deviation from the efficient market hypothesis, her returns are consistently 47 standard deviations above the mean. That's basically mathematically impossible without an external factor. Thank you, Kennedy called back. 47 standard deviations. For those who don't speak statistics, that's like being 47 feet taller than the average person. It's not just unusual, It's fundamentally impossible, without some external factor. Without, he added pointedly, access to material non-public information. He turned back to Pelosi, his tone shifting from analytical back to personal. Ma'am, you've had a lot to say about me today. Called me names, questioned my intelligence, mocked my accent. But here's the thing about numbers. They don't care about your opinion of me. They don't care about politics or rhetoric or fancy suits. They just are what they are. He leaned back in his chair. Now, ma'am, either you need to immediately resign from public life and start the world's greatest, most prescient hedge fund, or you need to explain to this committee and to the American people how a part-time investor, serving in Congress, consistently outperforms not just the market, not just Warren Buffett, but even the most sophisticated supercomputers and quantitative analysts on Wall Street. The hearing room waited. Pelosi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For perhaps the first time in her decades-long political career, Nancy Pelosi had absolutely no words. Cat got your tongue? Kennedy asked mildly. That's okay. Sometimes the numbers speak louder than words. He gestured to the pile of reports, the charts still glowing on the screens. And these numbers, they're screaming. For years, Nancy Pelosi had successfully deflected any serious inquiry into her family's uncanny stock market success with 5 simple, oft-repeated words. I don't own any stocks. It was her shield, her mantra, the wall behind which the uncomfortable questions inevitably died. Today, John Kennedy arrived with a battering ram forged from legal statutes, signed documents, and Pelosi's own recorded words. The shield was about to shatter. Kennedy reached for his tablet again, his movements deliberate, signaling a shift in focus. The hearing room, having just absorbed the devastating mathematical analysis, leaned forward again. The financial case was made. Now came the dismantling of the defense. Ms. Pelosi, Kennedy began, his accent wrapping around her name like honey around a bitter pill. For years, you've had a standard, almost reflexive response whenever anyone dares to question your family's remarkable investment success. You want to share it with us one more time? For the record? Pelosi straightened, grasping at her familiar lifeline. As I have stated repeatedly, she said, her voice tight but regaining some of its familiar authority. I do not own any stocks. I have no involvement whatsoever in my husband's financial decisions. There it is, Kennedy said, smiling that slight, dangerous smile. The magic words. I don't own any stocks. You've said it so many times. It's almost become your political catchphrase. Like, where's the beef? Or perhaps more aptly, he added, twisting the knife, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Nervous laughter rippled through the gallery. The comparison was brutal, but effective. Let's watch you say it a few times. Shall we? Kennedy touched his tablet, and the screens around the room came to life with a rapid-fire compilation video. CNN, 2019. Pelosi, looking stern. I don't own any stocks. MSNBC, 2021. Pelosi, dismissive. I have no involvement in my husband's investments. 60 Minutes, 2022. Pelosi, slightly irritated. I don't own any stocks. Press Conference, 2023. Pelosi, waving away a question. My husband makes his own financial decisions. Fox News, 2024. Clip from just weeks ago. Pelosi, exasperated. I don't own any stocks and have no knowledge of his trades. The sheer repetition had an almost hypnotic, yet deeply unsettling, quality. By the end, even Pelosi looked uncomfortable watching her own defiant denials played back to back. That's a lot of denials, Kennedy observed mildly, but you know what they say. If you have to keep saying something over and over and over again, maybe it's because deep down, people just don't believe you. And in this case, he added, there's a very good reason they don't believe you. He pulled out a thick, legal-looking document. This, ma'am, is the California Family Code. Specifically, Section 760. It defines community property. Would you like me to read the relevant passage? Without waiting, he put on his reading glasses. Except as otherwise provided by statute, all property, real or personal, wherever situated, acquired by a married person during the marriage while domiciled in this state, is community property. He looked up at Pelosi over his glasses. Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer. But that seems pretty clear to me. You are domiciled in California. You acquired this wealth during your marriage. In the eyes of California law, what's your husband's is yours. 50-50. Right down the middle. Legally. Those are your stocks too. That's not how we manage our. Pelosi began, attempting to argue marital specifics. But Kennedy was already pulling out another, even more damning document. Your tax returns, he said, holding up the thick stack. Obtained via proper channels. Joint filing. Every single year. You signed them. Under penalty of perjury. Right there. He projected Schedule D, capital gains and losses, onto the screen. There's your signature, Ms. Pelosi. Right next to your husband's. Every year. The signatures were highlighted, enlarged, undeniable. When those Nvidia options made millions last year. Kennedy pressed. Did you file separate returns? Did you legally disclaim your half of those profits? No. When the Visa stock soared back in '08, did you tell the IRS? That's his money, not mine. No. You filed jointly. You claimed the gains jointly. You benefited from the lower tax rates jointly. You enjoyed the wealth jointly. But, his voice dripped with irony. When someone asks uncomfortable questions about how that wealth was obtained, suddenly, magically, it's just your husband's business. Senator Warren leaned forward again. May I ask a follow-up? Senator Kennedy? Please, Senator. Kennedy graciously ceded the floor, knowing Warren's question would only tighten the noose. Ms. Pelosi, Warren began, her tone sharp. When you and your husband discuss household finances, perhaps over dinner, does he ever mention his trades? Do you ever ask how the family portfolio, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, is doing? Pelosi hesitated, cornered by a fellow Democrat. We don't discuss specific trades. Never? Warren pressed, incredulous. In decades of marriage, managing a $250 million fortune, you never once asked about specific investments? The questioning from Warren was devastating, lending bipartisan weight to Kennedy's point. Pelosi looked utterly betrayed. Kennedy seized the moment, stepping back in. Let me help you out here. Ms. Pelosi, I've been married over 40 years myself. My wife, Becky, she knows every single investment we have. She knows when I buy a stock, sell a stock, or even just think about a stock. That's what married people do. Ma'am, they talk, especially about things worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He pulled up another video clip. But don't take my word for it. Let's watch your interview with Jake Tapper on CNN. Just last month, the video played. Tapper attempted to gently ask about the insider trading allegations. Pelosi erupted. Video Pelosi, snapping. Why do you always have to bring that up? We're here to talk about healthcare. Tapper, uncomfortable, but Speaker Emerita. The American people have questions. Video Pelosi, almost shouting, I don't own any stocks. The real Pelosi in the hearing room visibly winced as her on-air tantrum played out. You seem a mite defensive there. Ma'am, Kennedy observed mildly. Like my grandma used to say. The hit dog hollers. And you were hollering pretty loud right there. He pulled out another document. Returning to specific examples. Let's get specific again. December 2021. Your husband bought $2 million in Microsoft call options. That very same day, you attended a high-level, closed-door meeting with tech industry leaders specifically discussing AI regulation and potential government contracts, information highly relevant to Microsoft's future. He looked at her. Are you telling this committee you came home that night from that crucial meeting, and didn't mention it to your husband? And he just coincidentally, magically, decided to make a massive bet on Microsoft options that very morning? Just two ships passing in the night? We have separate spheres, Pelosi repeated weakly. Separate spheres? Kennedy's eyebrows shot up. Ma'am, you live in the same house. You eat at the same table. You presumably sleep in the same bed. But you want us, and the American people, to believe you operate in completely separate financial and informational universes when hundreds of millions of dollars are involved? He turned to address the gallery again. Folks, I want you to imagine going home tonight and telling your spouse, honey, I just made our family $5 million richer today. But please don't ask me how. Because you know, separate spheres. The gallery erupted in knowing laughter. The image was absurd, insulting, and everyone knew it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Kennedy continued, pulling out a new, slimmer folder. As part of this committee's investigation into potential insider trading, we subpoenaed your husband's phone records. Legally. Pelosi's lawyer jumped up. Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous. Spousal privilege. Sit down, counselor. The chairman said firmly. This committee has broad subpoena power in pursuit of its oversight function. The senator has the floor. Kennedy smiled thinly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, we didn't read the content of the messages. Counselor, spousal communications and all that. But we did get the metadata. Times, dates, frequency, call durations. He pulled up a complex chart. And what do you know? Your husband calls or texts you an average of 15 times a day. Every day, including, very specifically, multiple times on the days he makes his biggest, most profitable trades. He pointed to the chart. Look at this pattern. Big trade placed in the morning. Flurry of texts and calls between your phones. Market closes with huge gains. More texts and calls that evening. It's like clockwork. He looked directly at Pelosi. But you don't discuss his investments? The evidence was becoming overwhelming. The separate spheres defense wasn't just crumbling, it was being systematically pulverized by data. But my favorite piece of evidence, Kennedy said, clearly enjoying himself now, the prosecutor revealing his ace, is this. He played security footage from the Capitol building itself. This is you, Ms. Pelosi, on March 15, 2023, in the members' dining room. The grainy footage showed Pelosi at a lunch table, holding her phone to her ear. Now, Kennedy narrated, we enhanced the audio. Perfectly legal, as this was recorded in a public space within the Capitol complex. Want to hear what you were saying? Before Pelosi could object, her own voice filled the room from the recording. Paul? Yes, that sounds great. Yeah, buy more if you think. No, I can't talk about that here. Call me later. The smoking gun. The room erupted. Even Democratic senators were shaking their heads in disbelief. Can't talk about what, Ms. Pelosi? Kennedy asked innocently. The weather? Your lunch plans? Or perhaps the confidential technology committee briefing on semiconductor subsidies you had just attended minutes before taking that call? Pelosi's face had gone from red to white and back to red again. Her carefully constructed defense, the shield she had hidden behind for decades, was in absolute ruins. The truth is, ma'am, Kennedy said, his voice becoming more serious, dropping the folksy charm. This whole, I don't own any stocks routine is insulting. It's insulting to this committee. And it's insulting to the intelligence of the American people. You are worth $250 million. That wealth was accumulated almost entirely during your time in Congress, largely through stock trades that defy statistical probability. It's in accounts you legally share with your husband under California law. You sign the tax returns acknowledging the profits. You benefit directly from the wealth generated. But when anyone asks legitimate questions, suddenly, you're just an innocent bystander with no knowledge and no involvement. He leaned forward, his voice low but intense. Ma'am, the American people aren't stupid. They know a dodge when they see one. And this, I don't own stocks line, it's the biggest, most transparent dodge in Washington. And that, he added wryly, is saying something. The chapter was drawing to a close. But Kennedy had one more dagger to twist. Oh, I almost forgot, he said, as if remembering a minor detail. Pulling out a final, single sheet of paper. This is a sworn affidavit from a former senior member of your congressional staff. Provided to this committee last week. He read. The speaker regularly discussed market conditions and specific sectors in senior staff meetings. Particularly around legislative initiatives, she would often make comments like, this would be a good time to be in tech stocks. Or, the pharmaceutical sector looks significantly overvalued right now given the upcoming regulatory push. He looked up at Pelosi, his eyes locking with hers. Still want to claim you have no involvement and no knowledge of investments. Ma'am? The hearing room sat in stunned silence. The husband defense hadn't just crumbled. It had been utterly obliterated, exposed as the sham everyone long suspected it to be. Ms. Pelosi, Kennedy said quietly, his voice carrying a note of finality. My mama taught me that, the truth will set you free. Maybe, just maybe, it's time you tried it. What happened next shocked everyone. including perhaps Kennedy himself. The meticulous, evidence-based destruction of Nancy Pelosi's defenses hadn't just silenced her, it had ignited a rebellion within her own party. The hearing room, which had taken on the somber quality of a funeral parlor, suddenly crackled with electric energy. The air thick like before a thunderstorm. Kennedy sat back, his folders closed, his case complete, but the reckoning was just beginning. Senator Elizabeth Warren was the first to move. The Massachusetts Democrat, whose entire political brand was built on fighting financial corruption, slowly rose. "Mr. Chairman," her voice cut through the silence, "I request permission to make a statement." The chairman nodded, looking surprised. "I have spent my career," Warren began, her voice ringing with moral authority, "fighting against the corruption that benefits the wealthy at the expense of working families." She looked directly at Pelosi, her expression one of profound disappointment. I will not, remain silent when that corruption comes from within our own ranks. What we've heard today isn't just troubling, it's damning. It's everything I came to Washington to fight against." Pelosi looked as though she'd been physically slapped. Warren continued, "For years, I've introduced legislation to ban stock trading by members of Congress. And for years, I was told it wasn't a priority. Now I know why. The person setting the priorities was making millions from the very system I was trying to reform." She pulled out her phone. "I am tweeting right now. No one is above the law. The Honest Act must pass. No exceptions, no excuses, no more insider trading, period." The sound of her typing echoed. Seconds later, phones throughout the gallery buzzed. Senator Josh Hawley stood next. "Mr. Chairman, my Honest Act now has 47 co-sponsors, including," he checked his list, 23 Democrats, "and based on the texts I'm getting, that number is climbing." As if on cue, Senator John Tester, a moderate Democrat from Montana, stood. "Add my name. What I heard today sickens me. This is corruption, plain and simple." One by one, the dam broke. Bob Casey, DPA. "The people deserve leaders who serve them, not their portfolios." Tammy Baldwin, DWI. "Working families deserve better than leaders using public service for private gain." Even leader Chuck Schumer felt compelled to speak, albeit cautiously. "These are serious allegations requiring serious investigation." Pelosi sat isolated, watching decades of power evaporate. Her staff texted frantically, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean. Kennedy watched, not with triumph, but with a grim sadness. "This isn't a happy moment," he said quietly, "but this is bigger than any one person. It's about whether we're a government for the people or for the insiders." His phone buzzed. He smiled slightly. "Well, look at that. The Pelosi Tracker app just suspended trading, pending congressional investigation. Even the algorithms know when the jig is up." The gallery grew restless. A young woman stood up. "My name is Ashley Martinez. I'm 26, $50 in student debt, working 2 jobs, seeing leaders get rich while telling us to trust the system. It's why my generation has lost faith." Security moved towards her, but Kennedy raised a hand. "Let her speak." Ashley continued, her voice shaking. "Ms. Pelosi, you were supposed to be a role model. You've betrayed every young woman who looked up to you." Another voice. "I'm Tom Chen, Robert's son. While you made millions on Visa, my parents lost their home. My mom cried every night. My dad took a second job at 68. And for what? So you could add another million?" The human cost was now impossible to ignore. Senator Rick Scott stood, holding letters. Over 1,000 constituents demanding action. Teachers, nurses, veterans, people who play by the rules. He read heartbreaking excerpts, each a dagger to Pelosi's claims of public service. Kennedy pulled out one last document. A statement from the California Democratic Party leadership. Sent an hour ago. He looked at Pelosi. She stared at the table. "The California Democratic Party is deeply concerned. We believe in transparency, accountability. We call on all our representatives to support meaningful reform." He looked up. "That's your own state party. Ma'am, they're not standing with you. They're standing with reform." The isolation was absolute. She had entered as royalty and was leaving as a pariah. "Mr. Chairman," Warren spoke again, "I move this committee immediately vote to advance the Honest Act to the full Senate with a recommendation for expedited consideration." Seconded, came voices from both sides. All in favor? Aye. The response was thunderous. Unanimous. All opposed? Silence. The ayes have it. The Honest Act will be advanced with our strongest. Unanimous recommendation. The gallery erupted in applause, young people hugging. The Chen family embracing. Pelosi sat frozen. Her political capital spent. Her influence gone. The old way of doing business in Washington had died. Killed by facts and bipartisan revolt. The chairman cleared his throat. His voice heavy. Ms. Pelosi. This committee will be referring these matters to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice for further investigation. Pelosi finally spoke, her voice hoarse, defeated. This is a political hit job, a witch hunt. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently. With all due respect, the time for speeches is over. The evidence has spoken. Your colleagues have spoken. Sometimes, the best thing to do when you're in a hole is stop digging. You think you've won? She spat, a flash of her old fire returning. Kennedy's expression was genuinely sad. No, ma'am, there are no winners here. Just a reminder that nobody's above the law. Not even the former Speaker of the House. As Pelosi was finally led away, past the silent, judging eyes of the Chens and Ashley Martinez, Kennedy packed his folders. The next morning's headlines were brutal. Pelosi abandoned. The numbers don't lie. Honest ACT headed for passage. The Pelosi Tracker app shut down permanently. Social media exploded with memes and outrage. Her own state party called for her resignation. Kennedy, back in his office, refused Sunday show appearances. I said what needed saying. He told his staff, the rest is up to the American people. Asked if Pelosi would resign. He mused, pride goeth before a fall. But sometimes pride is all that's left after. He flew home to Louisiana, leaving behind a Washington fundamentally shaken. The age of congressional insider trading was ending, brought down not by partisan warfare, but by the quiet, methodical application of facts, championed by a simple country lawyer from the bayou. The reckoning was complete.